Good morning again, ladies.
Good morning.
Today I wanted to teach you how to introduce and incorporate the first 3 steps into your recovery plan. So here at Recovery Solutions, that's really what we're all about, is helping you to develop a recovery plan which incorporates many aspects of life. And one of those very important aspects is going to be your recovery community, your recovery program. And as a social worker, I went away from really presenting steps in treatment, because you could go to the 12-step fellowship and you could put $1 in the basket and you could learn about the steps there. But what I found is that as the 12-step fellowships are evolving, they're spending less time on presenting the steps, and I found in my own recovery process that the steps really are the clearinghouse, the way in which we clear out the old stuff and we incorporate the new. So, in your black folders, in your packet, the intake packet that you received, you have a little handout that says, introduction to the first 3 steps, okay? And we're not really gonna be looking at that today, but if you haven't filled it out yet, maybe you would fill it out over the weekend, and then you and Mr. Alex and Ms. Camille can start to go over those things after what I've presented to you today, okay? So, the steps of the 12-step fellowships, their language is just a little bit different, and one focuses on the substance and the other focuses on addiction. When I'm talking about the steps, I am focusing on all substances. Alcohol is a drug, marijuana is a drug is a drug is a drug. And so I'm going to use the language from the Narcotics Anonymous steps, just because it encompasses so much. So whether you're a substance use disordered individual, an individual who has a gambling addiction, a sex addiction, a love addiction, or whatever is causing difficulty, even a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder, what I found in my own personal recovery and what I've taught my patients and their families that have come to seek services is that the steps can be incorporated into anyone's life, into any challenge. Okay, are you with me? Understand, right? So even individuals who don't have a substance use disorder, let's say we had someone who had a depressive disorder, I would be teaching them how to incorporate the steps into how to manage their depressive disorder, along with a lot of other things. It's not just the one thing, right? It's a bunch of things coming together. So today we're going to talk about the first 3 steps. I'm going to kind of move along kind of fast, probably faster than I would, because I want you to be able to get through all 3 steps, okay? So, first step, somebody tell me what the first step says.
We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unnatural.
Thank you. So in case anyone doesn't recognize, if you need to cheat, they're over here, okay? So thank you. So the first thing that I do with my participants is we're gonna take a look at what it says, okay? Because the words are powerful. They're not just words on the board. They're not just words that are read when you go to a 12-step fellowship. My hope is that you'll find that the words become internal to you and have meaning to you, and they'll be helpful to you if you have a greater understanding of what they are. So we're just gonna break down the first step. So the first word in the step is what? We, right? We. So when we look at this word and we say, well, you know, it's placed there, it's used, what do you think is the important aspect of the we?
You're not secluded, you're not alone.
Not alone.
I'm not alone, I'm not secluded. This is not just happening to me, right? And when you think about this not being secluded, or you're not secluded, or this isn't happening to you, how does that make you feel, or what kind of thoughts do you have associated with that?
Comforting.
It's comforting, right? Like this thing that has been inflicted, right? It's been devastating. It's tore our lives apart. And now we are introduced to a tool. They call it a spiritual principle. Did you know that the steps are spiritual principles? The steps are spiritual principles. So now I'm being introduced to a spiritual principle to help battle this very devastating affliction that I have. So when I'm talking, you know, different people are in different places when they come to treatment. They might not understand what addiction is. They might not understand what an addict is. They might not understand what an alcoholic is. And they might not understand what all of that means. So when I'm communicating, teaching, presenting, talking, I try to keep all of that in mind. So that way I can talk to everyone in the room, because normally I'm not going to have a room full of people who get it. Like we're evolving, we're developing understanding of what it means to have substance use disorder, to have addiction, okay? So, we're given this spiritual principle. The first spiritual principle is the first step. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. And now we're gonna tease apart, what does that mean, so that we can develop meaning for ourselves, right? So each individual will develop their own meaning based on their understanding. And hopefully, heighten awareness and more education. Okay, so the second word is what?
Admitted.
Admitted, okay? When we think about the importance of that word being there, what does that mean to you? And how does that become important in this process?
Being honest with yourself. Being honest with yourself.
Being honest with yourself. Anything else? So, when we come into recovery, when we come into treatment, like, you know, there can be many avenues that get us here, right? Usually, other people are saying, there's a problem and we want you to fix it, okay? And what we know is that people can come to treatment based on those, but normally, typically, unless recovery grabs a hold of you, until you admit it for yourself, until you recognize it's a problem for yourself, doing it for other people, doing it for other reasons, trying to keep your job, trying to keep your relationship, trying to keep your children, trying to do it for any other reason than recognizing that this is causing me harm and devastation and I want to do something about it, it usually isn't successful. We can get down the road a little bit, but we're not going to get down the road to complete abstinence and full recovery. So our goal is to help you to get to full recovery, complete abstinence. So it's important that you admit it for yourself, right? That we admit it for ourselves, that it's not husband forcing us, judge forcing us, anybody forcing us, that it's something that's coming from within that's saying, help me, I need help. The next word is?
Word.
Word. Anything stick out to you about that word?
Past tense.
It's past tense. Well, the does that mean, Miss Pamela, once I work the first step, that I never have to do this again? Does that mean that once I go to treatment, that this thing is all over and I'm cured? Well, we learned last week that it's not curable, right? So you're absolutely right. It is past tense. What I believe, and all of this is my belief, my perception. Other people are gonna have a different perception about how to incorporate the 12 steps, okay? This is just Pamela's, okay? But what I believe is, if you work a powerful first step, if you understand, internalize the first step, and you learn how to incorporate that in all areas of your life that can be challenging, then it does become past tense. Not that the addiction or the alcoholism or the substance use disorder goes away, but now you're equipped to not allow your addiction to cause the devastating effects that it would if left untreated. Does that make sense? You with me? Right? So that becomes a very powerful word, right? If we have a recovery program and it's spiritually based, and I'm trained on a daily basis to incorporate this into my recovery plan, then no longer do I have to be powerless over the use of a substance, but I can become powerful over my life. Did you hear what I said? Like, I don't know about you, but I want to have power over my life. Okay? I mean, I only have power to a certain extent, but I don't want to be powerless and having this thing dictate who I hang around with, what time I get up in the morning, if I can keep my kids, if I can go to work, if I don't want this thing to have power over me. So if I can incorporate these steps and internalize them and act them out, live them out in my life, then I have a lot better chance of never using again. Because when I use, I lose all of my choices. When I use, I lose all of my choices. It becomes about getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. Now, does that happen right away? It could. The substance of destruction for me, it would happen right away. All things would be unimportant because of the power of that drug. So I have to do everything I can in my power to the best of my ability on a daily basis to make sure that I never use again. Now, in the beginning, thinking about never using again was way too much for me to even fathom. So thank goodness the 12-step fellowships taught us about 1 day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time, right? But 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, I have the ability to make sure with this spiritual principle, with this first step, that I do not have to pick up a substance and be controlled by that substance. This one's a big one. What do you see?
Powerless,
And what does that mean to you?
loss of control.
Loss of control. Right. Normally, human beings don't like the idea of being powerless. Don't we like to have control? Don't we like to have power over our lives? So it was explained to me one time, if I look at the situation of powerlessness like I'm in the ring with King Kong, okay, who do you think's gonna win? I mean, me knowing myself, I'm probably gonna put up a good fight because I'm a scrapper, right? But the reality is that I'm not gonna win that fight, right? So does that mean that I'm a failure, that I'm a loser? No, it means that I'm smart enough to recognize that this entity, whatever that is, in this case King Kong, is a lot more strong than me. And if I look at the history of my using in my life, I can recognize that every time I would go back to a substance, I would use a substance, I would lose the ability to make good choices. and I would lose the ability to make good decisions in my life. So, what does that mean? It means that every time I get in the ring with my addiction, I'm stepping up to lose. So what do I wanna do? I wanna get out of the ring. I don't wanna, answer the call to the invitation, right? If King Kong is in the ring and he's saying, come on over here, I need to recognize that that is stronger than me, and I'm not going there. And if I can do that, it doesn't mean I'm a failure, it means I'm a winner. Because now I can make good choices for myself, and I don't have to just answer the call because something called me. And that goes to, whether I'm having a depressive episode, and I wanna lay down in bed and not show up for my kids or my work or my responsibilities. That goes to, if I'm having an anxiety episode, then I'm not gonna show up to my college class because I'm way too anxious. That means that if I have a craving, or the phone rings and it's my old dealer, that I have the ability to hang up the phone, and I don't need to answer that phone. Me not answering that phone doesn't mean that I'm a loser, or that I'm a failure. It means that I have the ability to make good decisions in my life, and I can follow through regardless of what I'm thinking or feeling. And luckily, the 12-step fellowships are gonna pull me along when I don't really know what to do. Cause I can go and I can raise my hand when I'm sitting in that seat and I can say, my name is Pamela and I need help. That's not my normal way of doing things, right? I'm pretty self-sufficient, I'm pretty independent, and a lot of these things that this stuff is teaching us goes completely against everything that we were taught. But I have to realize for me that everything that I was taught got me sitting in chairs just like this. So I need to educate myself on how to do things differently if I'm gonna be able to save my life. So powerlessness doesn't necessarily mean that it's a terrible thing. What I can do is I can recognize, well, what does it mean? We admitted we were powerless over our addiction. Well, what does that mean, addiction, right? So like I taught last week, and I continue to teach, addiction isn't because we're putting a substance in our system. Putting the substance in our system until it absolutely devastated our lives is what got people to pay attention. But the addiction isn't because I'm using a substance. The addiction is because I have a chemical imbalance that causes me to have distorted thinking and distorted perceptions. And I don't feel good if I don't have a recovery program. If left to this chemical makeup without a spiritual program, without a recovery program, I don't feel good. It's not my fault. I didn't ask for it. I didn't sign up. Hey, kindergarten teacher, I want to be an addict when I grow up. I didn't sign up for that. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to know that something's going on, and I know that something's going on because based on my history, things weren't working out very well for me. So now I need to incorporate new tools, new behaviors, new attitudes, new perceptions. So what does it mean to be an addict, an alcoholic? So there are characteristics in general that all individuals with substance use disorder share in common. If I walk into a room, I can't help it, I'm judging everything. Judging everything. So because of the chemical imbalance, there tends to be this negative thinking. Judging everything. My recovery program helps me to stop doing that and take another look, but my first thought is going to come from that addictive thought. Oh, look at this place, it's so messy back there, look at all this stuff. I don't know why these things are on, like, I'm judging. If somebody walks in, new patient walks in, I'm judging based on what they're wearing, their hairstyle, or, like, I'm not really that important. And that's another characteristic that individuals with substance use disorder share in general, that we're very self-centered. we think that the world revolves around me. And if I can just figure out how to make this plan work perfectly so that I can be happy, then the world is in the right place. And if it's not showing up the way I think it should, then all of you are wrong. And you all need to march to this too, right? So those are some of the characteristics that we share. Now, what was once our curse is now our blessing. What was once our curse is now our blessing. So there's a whole list, right? We're judgmental, we have a lot of negative thinking, we catastrophize. Oh my God, the world's gonna come to an end if things don't, we're self-centered, manipulative. Don't we love it when people do what we want them to do, right? And we don't even, by the time we get to a place like Recovery Solution, we don't even realize that we're doing this, but we have conditioned the people in our lives to line up the way that we want them to. And they're conditioned, and everybody's individual, and we get there in some way, but usually they're afraid of some outcome that they are trying to prevent. And we have taught them well that if they don't line up the way that we want them to, that outcome that they're so afraid of will happen. And so it's a subtle manipulation tool that we use unconsciously in order to get people to line up in order to help us with our self-centeredness. And I'm gonna get what I want at all costs, regardless of who I have to step over to get it. I know that sounds ugly, doesn't it sound ugly? But that's what people in our lives have had to navigate their way around. And it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to start recognizing these things. Because when we behave in those ways, those are us sidestepping off the path of recovery and onto the path of using. If we think we're gonna put our substance down and we're gonna continue to be self-centered, manipulative, have negative thinking, judge everything and everyone, complain about everything that we can possibly think of to complain about, the list goes on and on. If we think that we're going to be able to stay clean with these kind of things happening, then we have fooled ourselves. We can't. So our steps, the spiritual principles in the steps, gives us a way out. It gives us a way on to the recovery path and off from the using path, the addiction path, right? We can take the substance out of all of that and still have all of those things going on. You understand that? Right? So the steps are to help us heal from those things going on. But first we have to recognize and admit that there's a lot more going on here than just using. I mean, first we have to recognize that using is a problem. And then we have to stop using in order to see all of these other things that are happening. So I said what was once our curse is now our blessing, right? So there's other characteristics that individuals with substance use disorder have in common as well. We tend to be highly intelligent. We tend to be highly passionate. Tend to be highly creative. We tend to be highly caring to a degree. Artistic, intellectual, articulate, lots and lots of gifts. Of course, our drug of destruction covered those gifts and we forgot a lot of what those gifts are. So our spiritual principles and our recovery plan and our recovery program helps us to go back and find those things. Not only are we recognizing all of those other negative things about us, but we're also recognizing all of those things that we left behind. So this becomes like an adventure, right? And so if you see that, you know, you're being manipulative and you catch yourself, you have this little smirk, right? It's not gonna be the end of the world, but catch yourself and try to do it differently. Try to incorporate love, acceptance, surrender, right? So you don't have to tear yourself apart because you have this, because it's not your fault you have this. But it's your responsibility to recognize when these things show up and what can you do differently, okay? So what was once our curse is now our blessing. So I use manipulative because it seems like such an ugly thing, but I manipulate people all the time. We all manipulate people all the time, right?
Rhonda Jacqueline called and it stopped the recording.
Start it again.
Okay. Wait till she finishes.
No. Start again.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, on the phone.
Mm.